Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Maestro Moments with Conductor.org. Super excited for our guest tonight. We are going to be talking to a legend in our profession. Super excited. Four performances at the Midwest Clinic. The Lassiter Band under the direction of Alfred Watkins, four amazing performances, six performances at the BOA National Concert Band Festival, two times BOA Grand Champions, four Tournament of Roses parades, three Macy's Day parades. The accomplishments, any one of those performances would be the highlight of just about anybody's career, and to have the success to do it consistently throughout his career is just absolutely amazing. I'm so looking forward to taking a few moments just to talk with Alfred Watkins about his program, about his career, the things that he implemented to create that culture of success and the culture of excellence within his band program. So these Maestro moments are brought to us by our sponsor, Amano Music. So we're going to do a quick clip from our sponsor, and then we'll bring Alfred Watkins on.
WinConductor.org's Maestro Moments is brought to you tonight through the support of Amano Music. Amano Music is a collective for composers and a resource to band directors. Find the very best in wind band repertoire, from classic marches updated and edited for contemporary wind ensembles to the latest from innovative independent composers like the piece you're listening to right now, Chatterbox by Jason McChristian. You will also find resources for the band classroom, including books on topics important to band directors, as well as methods like mastering the scales to prepare your band to tackle rigorous repertoire. You can find Amano Music by visiting their website at www.amanomusic.com. That's Amano Music with a double A.
All right, super excited about this. And without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and bring on Mr. Watkins. Maestro, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm doing just great, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's my pleasure. I'm as I mentioned in the the intro there. Any one of those performances, to perform at the Tournament of Roses, to march down Fifth Avenue for Macy's, and to be invited to the National Concert Band Festival, Midwest. Holy cow! What a great honor to have your ensemble invited there, and just one invitation is absolutely amazing, and it's you're a legend because you've done it multiple times. So, the first question, I guess, is what is your secret?
Well, thank you for having me on, and I'm honored to be in this space, and I'm so happy to be able to talk to you and to any band director that's out there that would like to see what was happening in my life and my musical life, and there aren't very many secrets. Loving what you do, loving the students and the community with which you serve, and not the broad national community, the very small community that we drive past on our way to work, and a sense of family to give us a groundedness and to help nurture the person that's inside of us. And the rest of it is just hard work and doing it due diligence.
Right. So, just to share, if I can bring it up, you've got people can head to your website and learn a lot about you. And let's see here. You've got a great website here, and that tells us a lot about some of your accomplishments. And the article from a couple of years ago is available. From, gosh,
the Instrumentalist, yeah.
Instrumentalist, yes. Yeah. Great article there, great interview and all that. But, one of the things that I would like to know is maybe what your journey was to becoming a band director. What path did you take? How did you get involved in music, and what were some of your early heroes?
Well, I get asked that question a lot, and sometimes it depends on how the answer depends on almost the mood and where I am at that time in my memory. I'm from a small town in Georgia, from Jackson, Georgia. Very small little metropolis of about 2,500, 3,000 people, which was smaller than the population of Lassiter High School for most of those years. And I had a fairly normal musical background with a few exceptions. I grew up in the Deep South, born 1954 in Georgia, rural Georgia, about an hour's drive from Atlanta. It was the year that Brown versus the Board of Education was passed that desegregated the schools in the South. And so you can imagine me being born before that happened. But right at the point of that, it was a difficult upbringing because of the Jim Crow laws and segregation and racism that was the law at that time. And so we believed in love of family and believed. I grew up in the church and sang in the choir. But the pivotal thing for me was my grandfather, who was a sharecropper, was a shaped note singer. And
oh, wow.
every once a month in the parlor of their home, he would lead a delegation of people from the church singing out of the hymnal because he was grandpa and I wanted to sit on his lap and be with him. So I sat on his lap as he sang his bass baritone part that I can still hear. Now, mind you, he's been gone for 60 years. I can still hear his voice, his singing. And I could see the notes as he had them in his hymnal. And little did I know I would inherit his musical ear, in addition to being given his middle name. Both of our middle names are Lee. And so I'm one of the professional musicians that came out of that. Interesting story you should know is that, with the schools desegregated in 1970. I was a rising junior. So from birth until 1970, or the age of 16 years old, I lived in a segregated society. Fortunately for us, we were at the black school, the white school in town also. And at the black school, we had teachers that wanted to give us the very best of themselves for us to be able to move forward in the next generation. So I was around a bunch of intellectual people that were very decent people that would give us the best of themselves, one of which was my band director, Andrew Buggs. So when I first began playing the trumpet in the 6th or 7th grade, I think it was 7th grade, it was a junior high concept, 7, 8, 9. I think it was 7th grade. The trumpet that I was issued, as most students were issued instruments rather than renting it, only had 2 valves to it because it had been discarded from the white school. Much like our books, our everything that we had, when they discarded it and used it up, they passed it down as per the Board of Education to the black school. So my trumpet had 2 valves.
Wow.
And I had a little scar here on the 3rd valve, for 30 years, when I would put my fingers in and my 3rd finger would go in the valve casing because the valve itself was not there. And I knew it was something that was wrong. If there's, everyone has something kind of wrong with an instrument, but the teacher just kept going. So you'll have a 3rd valve one day, Alfred. So what I didn't realize is that whenever I had to play the 1st and the 3rd valve combination, of course I didn't have the casing in there.
Right.
So I would sing that note in my head, which was the beginning of playing and singing, or thinking or audiating, as I learned later on this call, the rest of my life. And so growing up in the church and singing in the choir, I didn't sing particularly well, but I developed a good ear. So between those two, I had a bit of an anchor. My 8th grade year, I finally got the trumpet with 3 valves on it. But the 3rd valve slide didn't move because that's why it gotten discarded. But I learned to play, and apparently I did okay. I played on through the high school band and was in district band and tried out for the Georgia All-State Band. But we found out at the point of the audition, I had passed the 1st round. To go to the 2nd round, I passed the audition that we were not allowed to audition for the All-State Band because of our race.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so and so that was a part of it. But you learn how to go around things as opposed to allowing for things to be a deterrent. There was a teaching of my parents, my grandparents, and the church and the school. Go around it however necessary. And when I matriculated for 4 years at my band director's alma mater at Florida A&M University, when I found a haven of Black intellectuals and a haven of great teachers, it was 1972. And it was the early stages of the Southern schools, colleges being desegregated. So we went to colleges that welcomed us as opposed to colleges where we were stared upon or didn't get a great education. And I ran into Black intellectuals. And as a result of that, my college band director was William P. Foster. Dr. Foster was a brilliant musician who had faced the same thing in the University of Kansas. He was a brilliant musician, a kind man, and anchored our program down. So my theory background is good. My history background was good. My applied teacher was phenomenal. My methods course teachers were Dr. Julian E. White, who just had his 80th birthday. She had his 80th birthday yesterday, and he's still active. And he was a brilliant methods teacher. And so I had a great band director background there. Played in the jazz band.
Yeah.
We didn't have a symphony orchestra. We were only a mile away from Florida State University. So we would go over to hear some of the orchestra performances, perhaps the opera. I taught for 6 years in the inner city of Atlanta, all Black program. I was comfortable in my cocoon. Had a program that went from kids couldn't play at all to kids that could play in 4 years, grade 6 music, and earn superior ratings at sight reading and performance. And I learned how to have high expectations for all students there. I learned pedagogy to the nth degree at that point because their skills were very minimal.
Hearing you talk, I keep thinking back to that statement that your junior high band director gave you. You said, Mr. Buggs said, "Don't worry, Alfred, you'll get a third valve one day."
Mm-hmm.
And it's I hearing some of those. I mean, that statement in itself is just. I mean, that's one of those nuggets of wisdom that your band director gave you at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
That life is going to throw obstacles at you. But you can excel, and that at some point in the future, we will get around that obstacle and be able to move forward there. And I just wanted to circle back around that because I mean just hearing you talk and everything, I can see where that statement probably had a profound impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it stuck with you to this day and really helped to shape a lot of that early part of your career and everything and moving in.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. But it was a way of life. And the textbooks didn't have front and back covers because those covers had been torn off and the front pages were torn off and the back pages were torn off because the school district gave us those books when the white kids had worn them out.
Mm-hmm.
And the footballs would have a part of the football covering would be pulled back, but the ball was still there.
Right.
The baseball would have some threads kind of missing, but you could still pitch it, catch it, throw it, and hit it. And so a way of life was learning how to work through hurdles that were changing. And so this was around 1967. Mm-hmm. And Dr. King and his disciples were already deeply embedded into the American fabric. And so you knew through your church background, going all the way back to the slaves, that it's not good today, but the sun will shine again. We just don't know when. So it was a way of life that you understood. You didn't accept it unless you had to. And if it made you angry, then anger would hurt us or hurt me. So my parents and the church and my schools and my teachers wouldn't let us get angry. They taught us to have resolve. And that's probably one of the things that anchored me throughout all of the years was that part of it. And fortunately for me, it worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said that you had taught for several years in the inner city of Atlanta before heading over to Lassiter. And that Lassiter is that's a very different school from the inner city. Aside, you mentioned that the student population at Lassiter was bigger than your hometown. So what was that transition like for you, moving into a big program, being someone that came from a small program and not having the resources that you had when you first came into a program like Lassiter? Or did you have those programs, those resources there?
Well, one of the things I learned is resources are extremely valuable. The resources that a band student has to have is an instrument, a music stand or chair, music, perhaps, and a teacher.
Right.
And there are so many of us that have resources that we don't use to our advantage, and some people that don't have what we consider to be resources where they travel through. The great opera singer who's still alive, Leontine Price, one of the greatest of all time, was born in Laurel, Mississippi in 1927. And how did she get from Laurel, Mississippi in 1927 to Central State and then finally to the Juilliard School to bring the prima donna, as she called herself, at the Metropolitan Opera? So there were no hurdles. So you have to learn how to be a salmon. Well, the short answer is that I have to credit when I was a little young pup, I was attracted to music that I heard in the church because it was melodic and it was rhythmical. And I was attracted to popular music of the day. I'm a fan of Motown.
Right.
Anything that sounds like Motown. So when my brother went to college, I was introduced to jazz during the straight ahead period of the 60s. And so I found Leonard Bernstein in the Young People's Concert on our little black and white TV that was played on CBS out of Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
And I was mesmerized by that when everyone around me was out in the summertime having fun. But something hit me that said, I like that sound too. So when I became a teacher, then the Beethoven didn't concern me. And the Symphony Fantastique, Berlioz, didn't concern me. I knew that repertoire. The Bach's B minor Mass was in my ear.
Right.
But so was Aretha Franklin, and so were the Temptations.
Right.
And so were the rhythms that go along with the Motherland, for example. So there were no mental and musical barriers placed here. And when I went through college, we received an education that was all of the above. So when I began teaching at Murphy, which was my school that was inner city deprived and all black, no one could play a major scale my first day on the job. So we started off by playing a major scale. A little girl played a B natural major scale in the piccolo. My first day on the job, I taught the band to find that note, whole step, half step, so forth. And they came out playing a B natural major scale, and they said, "See you tomorrow." And that was my beginning. And so we started there, and I just taught kids where they were as opposed to where I wanted them to be. I think that's really, really very important. And so I spent a whole career teaching students where they were and moving them up. I call it Poco a Poco.
Right.
And that's my favorite hashtag, little by little. And so when I wanted to have a band. I just wanted a band. And I wanted to hear the acoustical sounds that came from the band.
Right.
The concert band actually wasn't my favorite of the sounds, and neither was drum corps style marching band, which is what we did at Lassiter. And I went back to the things that were a major part of me, but teaching was what I enjoyed. And I learned that what a teacher has is information and ears and understanding. And it's our job to get it to our players or to our students. And it doesn't much matter if you have an elementary school choir or you're conducting a symphony orchestra. We help them through gestures, through our body, and through our language, or even through an interpreter as to how we hear a piece of music. And there are some structural things, the fundamentals that were the cornerstone of my teaching, the structural things. Develop tone quality, develop intonation, developing balance, developing blend, developing characteristic sound, teaching them and understanding interpretation, understanding the historical aspects of everything that we played. Even if it was a Baroque exercise, I would teach all of those students the difference between a gavotte and a sarabande. It was part of what I did. So I taught all of the above. So that when I left Lassiter, Murphy, which was my black school in the inner city, and went to Lassiter, this one was all black, about 120 kids, dripping wet, including everything in the marching band. I had 1.5 concert bands. To Lassiter, it was in its second year of infancy. And the Murphy band had more skills than the Lassiter band did. People would see me sometimes and said, I guess when you went from Murphy to this school that was 99.5% white and 0.5% other in its makeup. And they would say to me, I guess you died and gone to heaven. And I said, you haven't heard him play. Niggas dying and going to hell. But the middle school theater was a large, very
Okay.
large, 400 or 500 kids in the middle school band program. And I knew that if I could get the students from the middle school to the high school, that I could develop something. I could develop something. And so that's kind of the short Reader's Digest version of that.
Sure, sure. So I guess
But you asked a question. Let me go back and answer that question.
Sure.
It's important. How did I handle the transition between going from an all-black school in the inner city to a white school in the predominantly white school in the north? I went back to my Judeo-Christian background from my upbringing, and I saw all people as people, and I
Right.
didn't put them in categories and colors, and I didn't have them in crayons. And so my first week at Lassiter, there was a vehicle that came past our practice field, and the first day I was called the N-word.
Oh, wow.
First day. And but I'd been teaching for 6 years. I was 28 years old, and I wanted to have a band, and I had 120 students in front of me, and there were all kinds of things that were going on that were racist in nature. There was a Klan rally behind my practice field the night of my very first football game at Lassiter.
Oh, wow.
Name number one, pulled out, signed. But my students were on the buses.
Right.
They weren't at that meeting. And so I have always adored the probably 9,500 students that I taught at Lassiter. And they were never in that camp. And
Right.
they gave me a chance to be that teacher as anybody else would. And we flourished as a result of that. So there was never a problem with them.
So going back to your philosophy about the Poco a Poco,
Yes.
and I love that term. I'm going to steal that from you, Maestro. So.
Okay, no problem.
I love you said meet them where they're at, and then take them to the next level,
Yeah.
little by little.
Yeah.
So how much of going into this program did you foresee or have the goals of being a nationally recognized program?
None whatsoever.
Okay.
It was the farthest thing from my mind.
Sure.
I knew that the students had access to more capital. I knew that it was a better financed household
Mm-hmm.
because it was an affluent community on top of just being a white school. It was one of the more affluent communities in Metro Atlanta. And so I knew that they could afford to travel if I chose to travel with them. And I knew that they could afford a step up, if not a professional line instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean they were going to be successful.
Right.
But it meant there was a potential there. And those were so I knew that there was a potential for a larger program. And but I didn't have any idea of what they would end up being or what we would cap out as being. That was the farthest thing from my mind. I was still the same honest, hardworking teacher, and actually kept a very similar course of study all the way through 37 years.
Okay.
I didn't teach them any differently. They had high expectations here. I had high expectations here. I had students that achieved a very high level here, students with a very high level here, some at a low level here, and some at a low level here. But the goal was to take that old bell curve that I hated in statistics class in college, when they told us that 64% of the students or so need to be in the middle, some kind of a median mode thing, and that there were some 13, 14, 15% on either end, and some exceptionalities on either end. And I always rejected that because I thought it was not a good model for teachers, and we can live off that expectation. So what I always did was to take the middle and push it over toward the upper end.
That's awesome.
So we eventually would have 80, 90% here and 10% in the next four areas. And that was conscious. That was giving them skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty amazing. So, and in that instrumentalist article, the last line of it reads, "It was my job to create joy, enthusiasm, and excitement, and esprit de corps to the 10,000 students I taught in my career." And I think that it seems like that was the key throughout everything as far as your approach. Is that?
Yes. It was a joy of music.
Right.
And it was the joy of we do some things in our culture that cause for others to be gleeful and to have pure joy. We teach them that from a very young age.
Yeah.
When the grandparents spoil the kids by giving them some candy for the first time, and when
Yeah.
we wish them we give them gifts on birthdays and Easter, they get the Easter bunny. So we do that to create, and in the Christian faith, there's a American Christian faith, particularly there's a world faith, there's a Santa Claus, which it may be more fiction than it is.
Right.
We do it to keep the children, and I mistakenly call it a Christian notion, but it is. But we do that to create smiles on behalf of the children. And we tell the elderly when they are very senior that, Grandma, you're wearing a beautiful hat today, although it may not be. And Grandma, I love your outfit, although it may not match at all. But we do it to create joy.
Right.
And I did most of the things to create individual joy for the individual children. So if they had a love of jazz, then I was going to try to take them as far into understanding jazz,
Yeah.
all the way into fusion,
Right.
from the earliest forms, and take them to essentially Ellington if we could get there, which was our Carnegie Hall.
Right.
So the marching band Grand Nationals, it was a result of that. So were all the parades. I really loved the parades, though.
Yeah.
Because it gave us a chance to give our cheer to the children along the way.
Yeah.
And that next generation of 2 or 3 always watched the band coming down the street.
So along that lines, we know about the big parades, the Tournament of Roses and the Macy's. How involved were you with some of the other parades in Georgia or Atlanta, or any of the? How involved were you in that aspect of it?
Very much so, but we were not a parade band. We had to really train to become a parade band. We were a field show band, and but I would do if it were televised, I probably was going to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
And if it was in downtown Atlanta, where my kids could march between the tall buildings and see somewhat of a different culture than they saw every day out in the outer suburbs, I was probably going to do it. So you can look at the history of what I did. It was New York, which was cosmopolitan. It was California.
Yeah.
Particularly Southern California. It was Miami, and it was, we went to New Orleans, and I wasn't just going to take them to a place that looked just like what they saw every day. And, but we didn't do a zillion parades. I may do one a year, one every 2 years. But it was important that when the parades were great, because Grandma that lived in North Carolina could see young Aaron in the parade.
Right.
Point to him, or wherever Grandma may happen to have been. And so that made it real special, because my community was not a Southern community. Lassiter High School was from all parts of the country. And they came into it. It was a kind of a northern suburb, fairly new community. I went in the second year of the school. And so I had to try to build a community around the school band. And that I knew what I was trying to do. And that was positive. That was intentional.
So let's talk a little bit about that community that you developed, because also in that article it talked about, and you mentioned it earlier when you came in, you had about 100 kids in the band program when you first came in, and throughout your career you were putting well over 400 kids through the band program. You had in the marching program, you had 350 plus. You had in 4 and 5 concert ensembles, a phenomenal jazz program, as well as other stuff. So what was some of the design that you did going into this program to start developing that culture of music and that appreciation and that love, so that it was contagious, so more people would flock to it?
It's a good question. One, the band room has several purposes in the schools, particularly in the high schools. It's an early gathering place in the morning for students. It's a gathering place after school for the students. It's a cafeteria where they want to come in and eat during the lunch period, because they don't want to be around many of the students that I call them the regular students in the school. And so it's a room where someone would practice something individually or a group, so it had a lot of different personalities. So what I established early on is that when music making was happening in the large room, the room was quiet.
Right.
And that allowed for all of the students to hear what was happening, hear the music itself. And it was, you never could go into a back practice room and lounge. You were not allowed to go in the back practice room and just have your lunch and chat with a friend. That wasn't the rehearsal. That wasn't the band room. The band room was a place for music. And as a result of that, there's an appreciation for artistry that developed out of that. I think we all have an appreciation for artistry. It doesn't matter whether it's a folk guitarist or Aesop Perelman. They do it very, very well. We kind of develop an appreciation for that. So I fostered that through my conversation with the students. I fostered it with the conversation with the parents. And it was all based on the respect of what we were doing and excellence. But make no bones about it, everything had to be top tier.
Right.
It had to be top tier. And so that was that Poco a Poco. Okay, now you can play all your major scales, 1 octave and 2 an octave in a fifth. Okay, now where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And so all the major events were an outgrowth of that kind of excellence. And it happened by accident. You'll find this interesting. I was kind of like Will Smith in the movie Independence Day.
Okay.
And I say that because we sometimes as educators try to make a complicated activity even more complicated. Well, I think the opposite is what we should do. We should make the complexity of music with harmony and rhythm and so complex. We should make it as simple as we can so that everyone would understand it, particularly our students. That goes back to Leonard Bernstein, the young people's concerts.
Yeah.
Simplifying yeah. And so that was kind of what we worked to do, is to keep things as simple as we could. And so the language developed but Will Smith said, the movie Independence Day, there's a place where he and Jeff Goldblum are in this fighter plane, and they're on another planet. You'll remember that.
Right.
And they get in it, and Jeff Goldblum said, "Can you drive this?" And Will Smith said, "Yeah, I can drive." So he gets in, the first thing he does is he pushes it here to go forward, and that meant go backwards. And they hit the back wall. And one turned to the other and said, "Oops." And they took off and they sailed faster than Will Smith had ever driven a fighter plane before. It was at warp speed.
Right.
And he turned to Jeff Goldblum and he says, "I've got to get me one of these." And so I think we're like that as band directors. When we hear a great jazz band, we want one. When we hear a great concerto, we want one.
Right.
When you hear Miles Davis play, we want to sound like Miles. And when you see a great, whatever it is that we see, some of us will want one. Well, that was me. I wanted one just because I thought it was fun. And so if you got a 280-piece band that's doing 120 drill sets in a show, and the open tempo is 166, it's like riding I could give you some esoteric information, but the fact of the matter is, it's kind of like riding a 3-hour ride at the amusement park.
Right.
It's riding a 3-hour ride. It's no different than riding a thoroughbred at the Kentucky Derby. And there's a rush that comes as a result of it. And so I enjoyed the rush, and the students enjoyed the rush. So each day was to try to create that same rush. So the successful classes were when the bell would sound, or I would finish a phrase and say, "Okay, that's it for the day." And the band would go, "Oh, and we just keep going." So those were and that was frequent. That was frequent. Yeah. And because of that climate developed as a result of it.
That's awesome. So I didn't tell you about this before, but I actually found a clip from 1987 of the Lassiter High School Marching Trojan Band. So I'm going to cue this up and maybe we can talk a little bit about it. And, I found this as I was reading that instrumentalist article.
Thank you.
So, when I started looking at this, I saw that article where you said that you had, 100 kids in the band program, and here we are, what, 4 years later, and you are just still in the field with instrumentalists. Your auxiliary is phenomenal. You got that sound just coming through. So, Maestro, tell us what you're thinking as you're watching this.
It was fun. That was about a 300-piece band, I guess. And that same Fan Electro, Clifton Williams was out off the line, and that was in the original piece. And so I remember that band was the uniform I inherited. It was a copy of the Blue Devils uniform with orange and maroon and gold as a center. But I remember the energy that the program had at that time. It was, as soon as you can get an energy going in your program, that the community, the school community, and the parent community, and the band parent community, and the broader community bought into, then you became a buzz.
Yeah.
And so the band during those years was kind of like Duke basketball. It can get, Krzyzewski has this team that's so good that the co-eds, the students at Duke University will go and spend the night,
right,
get tickets for the game because of the energy that the program had. And so that program was, we were just energetic and growing. But again, the center for that was excellence. If you notice, the band had good spacing. That's a 30-year-old tape, 35-year-old tape.
Right.
And the sound quality is not too bad.
Right.
44-member trumpet section, and they were playing relatively in tune, and all of them were playing. And so that's what I think of when I see all of that, is that it was happy every day in rehearsal, but it was no different than playing a very difficult concerto for your instrument. And you try to master the Glazunov for the saxophone, or you're playing giant steps and you're trying to sound like John Coltrane.
Right.
And the mastery of getting to what is almost impossible, that fun can come in. But make no mistake about it, the program was highly disciplined. And I wanted to throw that out for a second, because we've turned that into a bad word. If a child needs to be disciplined, we'll send them to the front office for someone else to do it. And if I took a child to the office, they were about to be expelled, because I didn't do that. I dealt with my own issues within the house all of my career. And but I believed in making sure that the students learned how to listen, and they listened to learn. And that was an insistence that came from me. And so I did not allow talking in the classroom because of being distracted. And I felt like if I were sitting next to you, and if I chose to start a conversation with you, that would be me taking your potential for education out, which was central to my background.
Yeah.
I wouldn't allow for anyone to take, and I would tell them that. So please don't do that. If you don't want to listen, just don't say a word. Just sit. But at least allow for that student to listen. But that was at the core, and created was self-discipline and self-control, which we have in all college and all professional ensembles, and all of us through all of our music studies have self-control. And so the student in the classroom has to have that. And without that core of it, then it eliminates imagination.
Sure.
Creativity. It happens with individuals, but not large groups. And so that's important.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of your legacy is on Facebook right now. They are making some comments in the as we're talking tonight, and just wanted to share this one. Kristen Hawkins, is it Dickin? Kristen Dickin Hawkins said that was her great year, her freshman year in band, and I guess this was one of your sayings that you used to share with your band. Listen with your eyes and ears.
I would not talk to them unless their heads were up and they were looking.
Okay.
And so the attention span was the discipline of attention span. And Teresa Alvarez played clarinet for me. Gosh, probably 1990, 92. She'll correct me online. But yeah, listen with your eyes and ears. I taught them. And if you came in, or anyone else came in to address them in class or in rehearsal, they were taught to listen with your eyes and ears. I know my personal listening position is looking down at the ground on my shoes. That's my best listening place. I think better that way, but I didn't trust high school students to do that. And
Right.
so that was what I taught them to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's fast forward to 1998. BOA.
Okay.
Have a little clip of that, and I'm bringing this up. I have to bring this up today because it is March 4th.
Thank you for doing it. I didn't do it myself, but thank you. I love marching band. The thing
Yeah.
about it is I loved all of those groups that we had. I didn't
Yeah.
dislike marching band for concert. I didn't dislike concert. I didn't dislike jazz.
Yeah.
But I wanted each one of those because the students enjoyed the comprehensiveness of it. And so, no, marching band's great.
Yeah.
It's poo-poo too often nowadays. Can I say that online? Like poo-poo?
Yeah.
I guess you can say anything nowadays. Go ahead.
Right. So this is a clip from the Grand Nationals, and I love you were talking about that energy, and this opens up with that woodwind line. Love it. Love it. So a lot of growth and development in the program over the course of that decade there. And you can see the development. And obviously, I mean, you're in Indianapolis here at Grand Nationals. And as I watched this, as I was going through, I was picking out different things throughout your career and everything. And as I see the progress, I haven't talked to you now. I'm starting to get a glimpse of how, something like that. And seeing all the great comments that are popping up on Facebook right now. I mean, you definitely lived by that statement in The Instrumentalist about bringing joy and enthusiasm, excitement, that esprit de corps. And that's what really propelled you and your program to really strive for excellence. So,
yeah, that was one of the reasons I chose not to ever work on a university level. I was fine where I was.
right,
They could do that. They could play the Hindeman Symphony. They could play music for Prague 1968. The Winter Color Guard was winning championships at the world level, and I was fine where I was, and so I left well enough alone, so to speak. But you should know that I mentioned. I never spoke to the students about winning and losing. It was about the excellence of their own individual preparation, no different than they shared when they tried to make an A on every test they ever took, which is kind of like the rest of us. And so I used that as a motivation to help them to aspire for their own individual greatness, whichever level they move from here to here. As long as you continue to do it, then you'll maximize your skills. But that particular year was our third time at the national championship, 4 years apart. No student went twice. I didn't have a carryover class, freshmen to seniors go again. No, we cleared the whole tank out, emptied it out, started all over again from scratch. And it was a challenge to myself and the staff that we could be consistent and continue to grow. And I didn't want the students to have to compare one band to another. Well, I like this one better, I like that one better. So that was part of it. But the first time we went to the national championship was 1990. We finished fifth, and we were second and third in music. We went back in 94 and won first place in music, but third place overall. And when I got back home, the parents kept reminding me to think in terms of odd numbers. So it was a little pressure from them to go from 5 to 3 to 1. And the people around the southern region, the people in other parts of the country didn't think that Southerners could do very well. They didn't think that we were very smart. They didn't think that we could do very serious music. And they didn't think that we could achieve at a similar level which they could.
Mm.
And so I decided to go back to Grand National in 1998 to represent the New South, to show the country, yes, we can do everything we can do. We can be Ginger Rogers to your Fred Astaire. She did everything that he did, except she did it backwards and in high heels.
Right.
And just kind of like Spring Southern. And so we designed a show that year that was musically extremely complicated. And the students couldn't master it, realizing that it was going to be a winner just by its design. And we worked through the marching program. The thematic ideas worked very well. You'll love this. The only time I ever discussed winning and losing with the students was at that year, prior to that show. And we'd won best band in prelims. In the top class, we were best music, best visual, best GE. And in semifinals, they gave us the score, the placements. We were best music, best visual, best GE in semifinals. So I knew that we probably were going to be the champions if we didn't fall all over ourselves.
Right.
Semifinals was the same day as finals. So I went to the band at the pizza party just while they were in uniform, about 30 minutes before warm up. And I told them that they won these 3 captions, which was unusual, twice. And they cheered. Right. And I gave them the last little pep talk, but I didn't have the right words. So I said, when you go out, you're probably the best band in the house. And I grimaced, and someone in the back of the room, probably a percussionist, yelled out in a big ballroom, "You want us to go and win?" I dropped my head, and I did that, and they all screamed with laughter. Just laughing. And I said, "Oh, you fool. You're just a cusp of winning the national championship, and you've broken their concentration. And they're going to go out and do a kind of a not highly concentrated show, and you just cost the national championship." But to the contrary, they got the message.
That's
and
awesome.
So they went out and performed with the highest degree of concentration, because that's how they were wired. And but it's the only time I told them to try to win. And I didn't do that. Try to maximize your efforts. But that was every day in class, in a quiet manner, but reminding them that you can do better than this. Would you try that again? How are you practicing this at home? Just remind them to practice. Yeah. And that was kind of my philosophy and how I worked it.
So let's talk about, one of the things that many band directors dream of is getting to Midwest. And so what was the first experience with Midwest, and tell us maybe how that came about?
It was 1989, which was 13 years after college graduation, 7 years in the Saddle at Lassiter. That was the 87 band. It was about 2 years after that. We were quite deep. We had 5 concert bands at the time, and all of them, almost every year, were rated superior in performance and sight reading. We were fundamentally very sound. And the next step for the program was to apply to the Midwest. And so I didn't want to play at the Midwest because I thought it was what teachers oftentimes use as a stepping stone to college.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be perceived as using children for my own personal benefit.
Right.
But Gladys Wright, she and Al Wright from Purdue University was we had recently earned the Sutler Flag of Honor the spring before for concert band. And Gladys asked me, she said, "Have you ever applied to the Midwest?" I said, "No, we've not applied before." So she said, "You should do it. I'll call Barbara Buellman to make sure that she makes sure the application gets through." Barbara was John Painter's assistant with the Midwest.
Right.
So we applied, and they accepted the invitation, and we got accepted. I got the letter back, and I was petrified for about a month. They invite you in the spring, and I did a normal process of class. It lasted. A marching band was after school, and concert bands were during the day. Marching band was a volunteer organization after school, with which 95% of the children involved in it. But you were not punished if you didn't play in the marching band. It wasn't what we did. And so we prepared. So after about the first month of being frightened to perform in front of the world, realizing that that's our first time performing where CDs are available to every band director at the conference and more, then I got nervous that performance would go on perpetuity, not knowing that YouTube and all those things would be available. And we were frightened. I was frightened out of my skin for the first month, and then the rest of the time, The preparation was honest to create the best ensemble that I could. And the one moment that I remember the most from the Midwest is two moments. The children were terribly excited to be there because all the registrants saw their sweaters that said Lassiter Symphonic Band. And they would say, looking forward to hearing the band. And I'll be at your concert. And they never heard that before.
Right.
And so when we had our rehearsal, they were so giddy because everyone wanted to hear them play. And we were playing Alfred Reed's Third Symphony, the first movement he wrote for the Air Force Band.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the room, Williford room, one of the rooms, rehearsing, and in walked Alfred Reed himself. And the kids had seen his picture, and we were all frightened, and he gave us well wishes, and has become a good friend and was a mentor many of the years. The thing I remember the most was the applause when we walked on stage. It was an honest applause from colleagues by the maybe 1,500 to 2,000 I never heard before.
Right.
I never heard the sound of that honest applause. Welcome to the stage, and thank you for being in the Midwest. It was before the first piece, and I heard this unusual applause. It was humbling, stayed with me obviously forever, and it's something that I have still cherished for many years.
Yeah. Well, I actually have a clip that was on YouTube from 1980. It was your last piece. It was Prelude and Rondo by the great David Holsinger piece, and so let's take a listen to that.
The final selection in the Lassiter Band's program from the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic, 1989.
There was a documentary that the kids put together, by the way. That was not an announcement.
Prelude and Rondo.
Yeah, that the documentary. You can go to YouTube, and I'll pull it up here. You can find the whole documentary there.
Yeah, they went back, and I gave them a budget, and they did it, including hiring an announcement and everything, all from top to bottom. They enjoyed it so much.
It's a beautiful sound.
Thank you so much.
You know, just going back to what you were saying, you know, this is technology that is 30 years old now, and it's still coming through just beautifully.
Well, I kept a large symphonic band on top, which was this was about 70 members, I guess. It was normally between 60 and 70. The wind ensemble was the fifth band. It had about 35 students in it because they needed more individualized attention. So my college band director told me this, and so did John Painter. When I asked Mr. Painter about switching to wind ensemble, gosh, in the early 90s, he said, Alfred, your responsibility is to create the greatest music you can for the most students.
Right.
It's not healthy to have an elitist ensemble within your own group.
Right.
And then he referred, so I kept a large group on top because I could have the full symphonic sounds. If I needed to cut it down and be chamber-esque in nature, then I just I cut it down. And but there was nothing that so I kept it a pretty good sized group.
Yeah. Well, it's I encourage anybody. Like I said, you can find that the full documentary there on YouTube, and check it out. There's actually interviews in there where you talk about the whole process and things that you guys were doing to prepare and all that.
The students did that. They prepared the questions, and that was something that would happen rather regularly. The one you showed in '97 was the students and the parents putting a tape of the entire year.
Right.
The end of the year video, and they had the skills to do it. But that documentary they did, and I was an interviewee, and they talked about their experiences, as you could probably remember. And it was very. I knew I was on the right track when they did those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So let's it's evident that repertoire played a major part in your program because you every whether it's on the field or in the concert hall, you were always putting great repertoire in front of your students. So, going back to that instrumentalist article, one of the things that they mentioned in there is that in a given year, your top band would read 100 scores, second would read 80, I think, and then 60, 40, and 20 different pieces of music throughout the year. So, uh, do, what what are your thoughts on? And I guess it goes back to what you said earlier about giving them that vocabulary and that experience there. But what are some suggestions that you would give to band directors? We're this time of COVID where everything is shut down, we're hating it now. But I honestly feel that it is an opportunity for us to kind of step back, evaluate where we are with our programs, and begin developing plans to move forward. And maybe in terms of repertoire, if you want to take it in a different direction, because I know we're coming up on an hour now, and I don't want to keep you longer than what are some of your thoughts in regards to that and moving forward?
I've got about another 5 hours before I go to bed. Sometimes right now. I'm glad you asked that question. There's 2 or 3 ways of approaching it. One, I want to bring nothing but the finest repertoire that I could bring to the students that and in turn would create musical joy.
Right.
It was based on the simple concept of how we learn the language.
Mm-hmm.
And how we learn to write papers and essays. So my curriculum was simple in that regard. In that you learn spelling of words and nouns and verbs and how to use them, and an adjective and an adverb, and you construct a sentence, put sentences together, and you have a paragraph. And all through our learning, we're taught these through addition, numbers, addition, subtraction, and multiplication, division. And you got into the algebra kind of stuff. But with band, we start them off and give them 5 lines and 4 spaces, tell them what they are, hold notes down to 64th
Right.
note, and say go.
Right.
And so there's a structural part of every. We had 2 different ways of looking at our classes. One is that class was a 55-minute period that was mainly comprehensive musicianship, structural basis, much like an applied lesson. There was a tonal segment, technique segment. Every segment that I needed for applied studies was in every class, from the 5th band to the 1st band. Marching band was exactly the same way. And then there was another component that was literature based. And so we would play literature slightly underneath the skill level of every level band, so that they could play the music without having to struggle and fight for notes.
Okay.
We transferred the structure into the literature. So the classes were designed that way. The after school times, and we rehearse, typically, depending on the ensemble, 2 hours, 2.5 hours a week. And so those were the broader rehearsal hours where more detailed work could do. Each kid was it's kind of depending on the scene. So a marching band, for example, will do 30 minutes of movement basics, 30 minutes of sound basics, slurs, finger dexterity, and the woodwinds is how Sue Samuels developed those woodwind runs you heard.
Yeah.
The woodwinds and brass percussion rehearsed separately for a lot of rehearsal. We put them together to do full ensemble, an hour and 15 minutes into a marching band block, but they had individual pillars of skill, movement skills, playing woodwind, brass, percussion skills. We put them together. So the concert band was somewhat similar. So the class periods were mostly structural, mostly artistic, different shapes of phrases and different ways of looking at song. And I had a lot of different things we went through. But every Wednesday, for many of my years, was a sight reading day. And I tried to keep a sight reading folder. I wasn't always successful, but some years I'd have a sight reading folder along with your music folder. So on Wednesdays or Thursdays or Fridays, the sign would say, grab your sight reading folder. So the student would grab 2 folders. Last 5 minutes of class, we'd read the flat suite first movement down with the 1st band. Didn't take but 3.5 minutes.
Right.
And they'd have that vocabulary. And the next Wednesday, it may be a part of Hammersmith. And the next day it could be Rienzi. We'd read the first 3 or 4 minutes of Rienzi. And so we maximize that time and show them how to find recordings and give them recordings so they would have a musical education. And so that was always the goal, to continue to play a lot of music so they would learn nouns, verbs, adverbs, and adjectives in the musical repertoire, so they would understand what the various types of Baroque dances versus Wagner, versus John Cage. So whatever we could give them was a broader vocabulary, which helped with enjoyment.
So I wanted to go back because you mentioned this in the article as well about listening to music and giving them recordings and stuff like that. And you know, there's 2 schools of thought in that, and I personally lean more towards what you suggest with you know, giving them a recording when they're first you know, showing them the music so they can hear what the final product is going like. It, you know, not as a direction we're going to do it exactly like X Ensemble, but just give them an image of that music. And then you've got the other thought that, you know, we shouldn't have recordings because it will affect the interpretation or whatever there. But you know, what type of you mentioned in that article having the recordings. What type of resources did you provide for your students throughout in regards to listening?
First question. First, can I give the first question first? I'll forget the second one too. So you have to remind me. I tried both ways. I tried reading pieces of music down cold, and that worked just fine. However, if you're reading it down cold in the third band and they can't quite get through the music, and the low brasses have some great licks on the back half of the tune.
Right.
What happens when they go outside and they put the instruments away, and when they go out of the band on the door, the high woodwinds say, "Well, I love that piece we played today." So what are the low brass players going to say? I hated it.
Right.
I hated it. However, if you play them a recording, they'll listen, and all of a sudden the low brass comes up. And they go, I can't wait to play it. They're all on the same page of the book.
Right.
Now, the structural part of the program taught them how to read. We did reading and exercises every day to strengthen understanding of how scales and thirds, and how to read. So they could already read. So I didn't have a problem with students that couldn't read. So you let them. So I thought it was. I thought about this a lot. There's a school of thought that says just don't just let them play it first. It won't affect their interpretation. They're not conducting.
Right.
We conduct.
Right.
So the other thing is, well, they'll just copy the sound. Okay, well, how did we learn to play our instruments?
Yeah.
Our teacher would give us.
And I struggle with this because a lot of my people that know me, I have, well, you can read on the wall back here, I have a jazz background.
Yeah.
You know, in the jazz community, I can't tell you how many hours I spent listening to Miles, Clifford, and Charlie Parker transcribing their solos. And, you know, it was never so that I could go on stage and play a Clifford Brown solo in a jazz jam or something like that. That was never the goal, but I wanted to learn. Going back to what you said, I wanted to learn that vocabulary. I wanted to learn you know, how did they articulate this passage? And you know, one of the cool things about YouTube now is going back to the whole suite. You know, you can go find a recording of North Texas playing it. You can, you know, North Shore just put out a COVID recording of it where they were all spread out and everything. It was a good recording. You know, and there's so many ensembles. You can listen to the President's Own performing that piece, and you can see the different styles of how they approach you know, what they're seeing on the page to express that emotion.
You're exactly right. The students aren't making those interpretive decisions.
Right.
That's rubbish. The band directors are making those interpretive decisions. So the band director copies Mallory Thompson, or the band director copies John Bourgeois, Jason Fettig. It's not the students copying that. When we went into applied lessons, the teacher would give us a solo, and I would say, "Oh, it's the Artunian." I just heard Bobby play it on the recital last week. I'm anxious to play it.
Yeah.
Or if he would give me a new piece, he said, "Well, I'd like to play this Corelli piece." He said, "I'll play a little bit of it for you." And he played a little bit, and I'm watching it. I said, "Okay, I like that one." And so that's how we are. And we've always been that way in music. It's just that we think that, but if you don't teach them to read and be fundamentally sound, then they will have hurdles later on. My program wasn't organized that way. I keep mentioning that structural part was the first half of class. It wasn't like a little warm up. It was the first half of class, no different than anything else. And so I think that we, as sometimes classically trained musicians, think too much of themselves. And they don't learn from everyone, all the other musics of the world.
Right.
And philosophically, you can earn a degree in America, a terminal degree in America, and not be required to study the music of over half the world.
Right.
And I think it's really sad. And so I tried to find a curriculum that worked for me. And I mentioned that all of the bands earned superiors in sight reading at evaluation earlier, including the great
How could they not?
band.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they just didn't show up being able to read. That's just not how it works. So that was a part of it. Now you asked me a second question. I told you I was going to forget. So Aaron, you have to remember what that second half of the question was.
Well, I guess, what would you suggest to band directors, I guess, going into next year? Hopefully we're back to normal, a whole lot further down the road. I know here in North Carolina, we're finally getting kids in the band rooms. I made my first notes in the band room. Well, I'm brand new to the high school that I'm at, and it was my first notes with kids live, which was exciting for me. And it gave me great. I'm thrilled to move forward next year to make some music and as we get closer to normal. But what are some things that maybe you would suggest to directors who may be looking at their program to start implementing some good new traditions in what they're doing?
You'll need to rebuild your programs.
Yeah.
And build them better the second time around.
Right.
Play music from teach your students that women are composers.
Mm-hmm.
Teach your students that African Americans are composers, that the LGBT community is alive,
mm-hmm.
the Latinx community is alive, and they write music and compose music and play music the second time around. And make sure that there's an enthusiasm for music and the spirit of playing acoustical sounds together, because that's what causes the hair to come up on the arm.
Yeah.
It's not a recording. You can't get it.
Nope.
It's the acoustical sound that I haven't heard in a year, and I'm anxious to hear that again. And so are so many people. If we start to chase the competition bug and to try to chase the dreams that they have as an ultimate experience, then the children will be pawns for them to get to where they want to go. And it's a good chance the house of cards will come down. And so what you want to do is have a long ride for excellence every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible if they have a vocabulary, mental vocabulary, and they have skills.
Right.
And with so much now online, I think teachers found out how to allow for them to have individual skills to develop in addition to the large ensemble. If you can do that, then that's money.
Right.
That's what an applied teacher does. An applied teacher will give you materials to play, and you practice them for that week and come back and demonstrate what you have done. So that's the private lesson approach to the school band. And oftentimes we get back in there and say, well, let's just do this. I can't wait to put a big band together. Well, the big band is fine, but they got to be able to understand the style to play that. So combos sometimes work better than big bands do. If you're big band based, if you're marching band based, make sure that there's enthusiasm and joy for a musical product that's at a high level.
Right.
And so if you accomplish those goals, if you set your ceilings too low, what happens when you touch it?
Right.
There's nothing else left. So you can see I'm 9 years out and I'm still excited. I just got tired of going to football games. I got tired of going to faculty meetings, and I just got tired of the mundaneness of doing what I had to do on someone else's schedule. So I stopped doing it after 37 years. But I didn't lose my love of teaching, my love of music, or my joy. And I'm so anxious to share the joy with others, as you can see that my students have enjoyed through the years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you still are available and active to help as a clinician and a guest conductor And what is the best way for people to find you to inquire about that kind of stuff?
Since you brought it up, they can go through my website, alfredwatkins.org, which is not terribly up to date, but it's still my website. And there's a link to me. And my address is AWATBND at, there it is, at Gmail, I think. There it is.
Yep. We'll go ahead and put it on the screen.
On the website, by the way, is a former student of mine's music. His name is Viet Quang. He's quite, Dr. Viet Quang is a quite noted composer. He came through the Lassiter band. I need to give him a shout out because the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra recorded one of his works today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he sent me a note last night. It's an oboe duet with concerto with string with a orchestra accompaniment. He came out of the Lassiter band and through all of that. And so I'm real proud of Viet and all the students that have come through. But I want to give him a shout out because it's not every day that you get a student that's a really fine composer to come through all of that. He was a young percussionist who also played a terrific clarinet.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Well, Maestro, I appreciate you staying longer than an hour with us to share some of your wisdom. I know that I've grown from it, and I just really appreciate all that you've given. I love the example that you give us, and it's been good to hear what is important within a band program, and it's not the winning, it's not the competitions, it's going back to what you said, is meeting them where they are, and poco a poco.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you. If you were just the two of us, Aaron, I would be equally as excited because I'm giving information and helping a band director think through what to do tomorrow, perhaps next year, perhaps 5 years or 10 years away. So I'm honored that you'd asked me in, and I've had a wonderful visit with you.
Awesome. Well, it's been great. Thank you so much, Alfred.
You're welcome.